The scream tore through Ravenhollow Castle at precisely 3:17 a.m., the same time it had every night for the past 6 years. But this scream was different. It wasn't voiced. It was the sound of terror so complete, it bypassed language entirely. A psychic wail that made the ancient stone walls tremble. Iris pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't entering through her ears. It was crawling directly into her mind, scraping against the inside of her skull like nails on bone. Around her in the servants' quarters, the other maids remained perfectly still in their beds. Eyes open, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to end. No one spoke about the screams. Not officially. "New girl," someone hissed from the darkness. Old Bethany, the head housekeeper, her voice rough as gravel. "You learn to sleep through it or you leave. Those are your choices." Iris sat up slowly, her thin blanket falling away. She'd been at the castle for exactly 4 days. For nights of that sound. For mornings of watching servants move through their duties with dark circles under their eyes and tremors in their hands. "What's wrong with the prince?" Iris whispered. Silence. Heavy and suffocating. Then Bethany's voice, colder now. "Prince Lucian doesn't speak. Never has. The king says it's a condition. The physicians say it's trauma. The priests say it's a curse." She paused. "We say it's not our business. But he screams. He has night terrors. The king handles it. We do our jobs and stay out of the East Wing after dark. That's the rule." Iris lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Because unlike the other servants, she'd heard something else beneath that scream. Something the others missed or chose to ignore. It wasn't just terror. It was a plea for help. Morning arrived gray and cold. Iris had been assigned to the lower halls, scrubbing floors, emptying chamber pots, work that kept her far from the royal family. Which was fine. She was here for the money, nothing more. 3 months' wages at Ravenhollow could pay for her sister's medicine for an entire year. She could endure 3 months of anything. "You girl." A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Iris looked up from her scrub brush to find a thin man in dark robes staring down at her with undisguised contempt. "You're the new maid?" "Yes, sir." "Stand when the king's advisor addresses you." Iris scrambled to her feet, water dripping from her raw hands. The man was perhaps 50, with a face like a hawk and eyes that calculated everything they saw. His name was Theron, she'd learned. He'd served King Casimir for 30 years. "You've been assigned new duties," Theron said, handing her a folded piece of parchment. "Effective immediately." Iris unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. Her blood turned to ice. "Prince Lucian's chambers. Daily cleaning and care. Report to the East Wing at dawn." "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. Theron's smile was razor thin. "I beg your pardon?" I mean surely there's been a mistake. I'm only qualified for lower hall work. I don't have experience with." The prince's last attendant quit 3 days ago. The one before her lasted 2 weeks. The one before that had to be removed from the castle in restraints, screaming about demons. His voice remained perfectly pleasant. "You will report to the East Wing tomorrow at dawn, or you will forfeit your position and any wages owed." He turned to leave, then paused. "A word of advice, girl. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you think you understand, keep it to yourself. The king's patience with gossiping servants is limited." Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. Iris stared at the parchment in her hands. East Wing. Prince Lucian's chambers. The mute child who screamed in the night. She thought of her sister. Of the medicine she couldn't afford. Of 3 months that suddenly felt like an eternity. She had no choice. The East Wing was different. Iris felt it the moment she crossed the threshold at dawn. The air was heavier here, colder, despite the torches burning in their sconces. The shadows seemed deeper, more deliberate, as if they were watching her. No other servants walked these halls. No guards stood at attention. Just empty corridor after empty corridor, leading deeper into the castle's heart. At the end of the final hallway stood a door carved with thorns. Prince Lucian's chambers. Iris knocked softly. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Silence. Your Highness. Her voice sounded too loud in the stillness. I'm Iris. I've been assigned to your care. May I enter? Nothing. Slowly, she pushed the door open. The room beyond stole her breath. It was enormous, easily the size of the entire servants' quarters combined. But it felt wrong. Too perfect. Too sterile. Everything was positioned with mathematical precision. Toys arranged in neat rows on shelves, sorted by color and size. Books stacked at perfect right angles. The bed made so tightly that not a single wrinkle marred the surface. Even the curtains were drawn to identical lengths on either side of the window. It didn't look like a child's room. It looked like a museum display. And in the corner, barely visible in the dim morning light, sat a small figure. Your Highness. The boy didn't move. He sat on a cushion near the window, knees drawn to his chest, staring at nothing. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, though Iris knew from castle gossip that Prince Lucian was actually 12. Small for his age. Fragile-looking. His hair was black as midnight, hanging in front of his face. His clothes, a silk tunic and soft trousers, were immaculate. Not a stain, not a wrinkle. Like he'd been dressed that morning and hadn't moved since. I'm going to start cleaning now, Iris said gently, moving into the room. I'll try not to disturb you. No response. The prince might as well have been carved from stone. Iris began with the easiest tasks, dusting the shelves, sweeping the floor. All the while, she watched him from the corner of her eye. He never moved. Never blinked. Just stared at that same fixed point on the wall. It was unnatural. As she worked her way around the room, Iris noticed other things. Scratches on the windowsill, as if small fingers had clawed at the wood. A dark stain on the carpet beneath the bed, only partially hidden by the perfect positioning of the bed skirt. And everywhere, those toys. Wooden soldiers. Porcelain dolls. Mechanical animals. Music boxes. Puppets with painted faces. Hundreds of them. All perfectly arranged. All staring with glass eyes or painted expressions. Iris shivered. Something about them felt wrong, though she couldn't articulate why. She was dusting a shelf of music boxes when her hand knocked one slightly out of alignment. Before she could fix it, a sound made her freeze. A whimper. She turned. Prince Lucian had moved for the first time. His hands were clenched into fists, his whole body rigid with tension. And his eyes, those silver blue eyes, were fixed on the music box she'd disturbed. I'm sorry, Iris said quickly, adjusting it back to its exact position. I didn't mean. The prince's mouth opened. No sound came out, but his lips formed a single word. Please. Iris's heart clenched. What is it? What do you need? But Lucian was already retreating into himself, curling tighter into his corner, his face disappearing behind his hair once more. The moment was over. Iris finished cleaning in silence, but her mind raced. That look of terror when she'd moved the toy. The way everything in this room was positioned so precisely. The scratches on the windowsill. This wasn't just a child with selective mutism. This was a child in a cage. That night, the scream came again. 3:17 a.m. Iris sat bolt upright in bed, that soundless wail tearing through her consciousness. But this time, she didn't cover her ears. This time, she listened. Beneath the terror, beneath the anguish, she heard words. Not spoken, Prince Lucian couldn't speak, but transmitted somehow. Feelings shaped into meaning. Watching. Always watching. Can't escape. Help me. Someone help me please, please, please. Iris was moving before she'd made a conscious decision. Out of bed. Into the corridor. Running toward the east wing while every instinct screamed at her to go back, to hide, to pretend she'd heard nothing. The east wing was dark. No torches burned here at night. But Iris had memorized the path earlier, and she navigated by touch and memory until she reached that thorn-carved door. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence now. The scream had ended. Your Highness, she whispered. It's Iris. Are you all right? A shuffling sound from inside. Then, softly, so softly she almost missed it, the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Iris tried the handle. Lucian, if you can hear me, I want to help you. But I need you to. The door swung open. Prince Lucien stood in the doorway, illuminated by a single candle. His face was streaked with tears, silent tears, his mouth clamped shut as if physically incapable of making sound. But his eyes were desperate, pleading. He grabbed her hand and pulled her inside. The room was different at night. The shadows were deeper, more oppressive. And those toys, all those perfectly arranged toys, seemed to watch with malevolent intent. Lucien dragged Iris to the corner where he'd been sitting that morning. He pointed at the wall with a shaking finger. At first, Iris saw nothing. Just expensive wallpaper with a subtle pattern. But then Lucien pressed his palm flat against a section of wall, and the paper shifted slightly. A seam. Barely visible. Iris knelt beside him, examining it more closely. Her fingers found the edge, and she carefully peeled back a corner of wallpaper. Beneath was something that made her stomach drop. Holes. Dozens of tiny holes drilled through the wall. Each one no larger than a copper coin. And through those holes, darkness. Empty space. Someone had drilled viewing holes into the prince's chambers. Oh gods, Iris breathed. Lucien was shaking now, both hands pressed over his mouth as if to keep sounds from escaping. Tears streamed down his face. He pointed to the toys on the shelves, then to the holes, then to his own eyes. He was trying to tell her something. Iris stood slowly, moving to the nearest shelf. She picked up a wooden soldier, turning it over in her hands. It was beautifully crafted, with articulated joints and detailed painting. But as she examined it more closely, her blood ran cold. In the soldier's chest. A tiny glass lens. A camera. Her hands shook as she set the soldier down and picked up a porcelain doll. Same thing. A lens hidden in one eye socket, so small it was almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. The music box. The mechanical dog. The painted puppets. Every single toy in this room had been modified. Someone had been watching Prince Lucien. Recording him. Every moment of every day and night. For 6 years. Iris turned to face the boy. He had collapsed onto the floor, his body racked with silent sobs. And suddenly, everything made sense. The perfect arrangement of every object, so the cameras would have clear sight lines. The scratches on the windowsill, attempts to escape. The screams at 3:17 a.m., when the terror became too much to contain, even without a voice. The muteness itself. They hurt you, Iris whispered, kneeling beside him. Someone hurt you, and they told you that if you ever spoke, if you ever told anyone, they'd do it again. Lucien nodded frantically, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. Who? Iris demanded, her voice shaking with rage. Who did this to you? The prince pointed toward the door. Then he mimed something, an older man, tall, thin, wearing robes. Iris's blood turned to ice. Theron, the king's advisor. Iris didn't sleep that night. She sat in her quarters, mind racing. If she went to the king, would he believe her? Theron had served him for 30 years. She was a maid who'd been here 4 days. And if Theron discovered she knew, she thought of those cameras, those holes in the walls. Theron was watching. Right now. He knew she'd entered the prince's chambers after dark. He knew they'd discovered his surveillance. Which meant she was already a target. Unless she acted first. At dawn, Iris returned to the east wing. This time, she brought tools, a small knife from the kitchen, a sack made of rough cloth. And she brought something else, determination forged from fury. Prince Lucien was already awake, sitting in his usual corner. But when he saw Iris, his eyes widened with hope and terror in equal measure. We're going to gather evidence, Iris said quietly, keeping her voice too low for any hidden devices to capture clearly. And then we're going to stop this. For the next hour, Iris worked methodically. She removed cameras from toys, placing each one carefully in her sack. She documented the holes in the walls with sketches. She searched for any other evidence, and found it. Beneath the prince's mattress, hidden inside a tear in the fabric, journals. Not written. Lucien couldn't read or write, she realized with dawning horror. They'd never taught him. But he could draw. Page after page of drawings. Childish sketches that told a story more horrifying than any written testimony. A tall, thin man coming to the nursery at night. The same man placing toys in the room, one by one. The man's face close to the child's, finger pressed to lips. Silence. And later drawings, darker ones. The man showing the child images. Terrible images on papers that made Iris's hands shake. Threatening what would happen if the prince ever spoke. If he ever told. 6 years of psychological torture, documented in crayon and charcoal. I need to take these, Iris whispered to Lucien. I need to show your father. Will you trust me? The prince hesitated for a long moment. Then, slowly he nodded. Iris was gathering the journals when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming closer. She met Lucien's eyes and saw her own terror reflected there. They both knew who it was. The door opened. Theron stood in the doorway, and his pleasant mask had finally slipped. The face beneath was cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. You should have minded your own business, he said quietly. Iris stepped in front of Lucien instinctively, positioning herself between the boy and Theron. The sack of cameras and journals felt impossibly heavy in her hands. The king will want to see these, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Theron laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The king sees what I allow him to see. I've been managing Casimir for 30 years, girl. Do you think you're the first person to try to expose me? He stepped further into the room, and Iris saw he wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked him, their expressions carefully neutral. The previous maids who served the prince, Theron continued conversationally. Where do you think they went? The one who quit? The one who lasted 2 weeks? The one removed in restraints? Horror crawled up Iris's spine. You killed them. I protected the kingdom's interests. The prince is unstable. Damaged. His continued existence is a liability, but King Casimir refuses to see reason. So I've been documenting his condition, gathering evidence of his unfitness to rule. Theron's eyes glittered. Those cameras were insurance. Proof that he's mad, violent, uncontrollable. He's a child you've been torturing. He's a weapon I've been neutralizing. Theron gestured to the guards. Take her to the cells. The prince and I need to have a conversation about discretion. The guards moved forward. Iris clutched the sack tighter, her mind racing for options. Behind her, she heard Lucien stand. Felt his small hand grip the back of her dress. And then, a sound. Not voiced. Not quite. But a vibration in the air itself. A psychic pulse that emanated from Prince Lucien with such force that everyone in the room staggered. Theron's eyes widened. Impossible. The binding. Another pulse. Stronger. The air itself seemed to ripple. And with it came feelings, emotions, memories, not Iris's own, but Lucien's. Flooding into her mind and into everyone else's consciousness. She saw through the prince's eyes. 6 years old. Unable to speak since birth. Father desperate for a cure. Theron offering to help. Private sessions. Special therapy. But the therapy was torture. Psychological warfare designed to break the child completely. The cameras installed. The constant surveillance. The threats whispered in the dark. If you tell, I'll hurt everyone you love. I'll make your father hate you. I'll prove you're a monster. The boy's power, natural vampire telepathy, growing stronger with his terror. Theron recognizing it as a threat. Placing magical bindings to suppress it. But the bindings only worked if Lucien remained silent. If he tried to communicate, the bindings would activate, causing excruciating pain. A prison built from silence and fear. The guards had fallen to their knees, hands pressed to their heads, tears streaming down their faces. They'd felt it too. The truth. The agony. The 6 years of isolation. Theron alone remained standing, though he swayed. His face had gone gray. You little... He lunged forward. A door slammed open. King Casimir stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen more guards. His face was carved from fury and heartbreak. I felt it, the king said, his voice deadly quiet. Every person in this castle felt it. The wards triggered. They showed me, his voice cracked. They showed me everything. Theron straightened, calculating. Your Majesty, you must understand. I understand that you've been torturing my son for 6 years. Casimir moved into the room with supernatural speed, grabbing Theron by the throat. I understand that every night at 3:17 a.m., when the bindings weakened slightly, my boy screamed for help and I did nothing. Because you told me it was night terrors. Because I trusted you. The Vampire King's eyes blazed red. Give me one reason I shouldn't tear you apart right now. Because, came a small, rough voice. Everyone turned. Prince Lucien stood straight for the first time, his hands still gripping Iris's dress. His mouth was open and sounds, broken, painful but real, were emerging from his throat. Because, Lucien repeated, each word clearly agonizing, I want to testify. I want everyone to know. Silence fell like snow. The prince who hadn't spoken in 12 years had found his voice. The trial of Theron lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. Cameras, journals, testimony from the guards who'd felt Lucien's psychic broadcast. But it was Lucien's testimony, halting and painful but unwavering, that sealed the former advisor's fate. Theron was executed at dawn on the 4th day. Iris didn't attend. She was with Lucien. They sat in the garden of the castle, a space the prince had never been allowed to visit. Lucien's voice was still rough, each word an effort. But he was learning to use it, to shape sounds into meaning without triggering the magical bindings that Theron had placed. Those bindings were being removed slowly by court mages. But the psychological damage would take longer to heal. Why did you help me? Lucien asked, his speech slow but clear. The others, they all left. Iris thought about that. About her sister. About the money she'd needed so desperately. About how easy it would have been to look away. Because you asked, she said simply. That first night when you screamed, you were asking for help. And I couldn't ignore that. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then, will you stay? My father offered to make you my official guardian. Since my mother... He trailed off. The late queen had died in childbirth. Lucien had never known her. I'll stay, Iris said. For as long as you need me. A small smile crossed the prince's face. The first she'd ever seen. But, because I'm going to need a lot of help. Learning to be normal. You're already pretty extraordinary, Iris said. We'll figure out normal together. King Casimir found them there hours later, sitting in companionable silence while Lucien slowly read from a book, the first time he'd been taught to read. The Vampire King looked older somehow, worn down by guilt and grief. Miss Iris, he said formally, the kingdom owes you a debt beyond measure. I don't want a debt, Your Majesty. I just want Lucien to be safe. He will be. I swear it. Casimir looked at his son, and pain crossed his features. I failed him. For 6 years, I failed him because I was too blind, too trusting. Father, Lucien said quietly, Theron was very good at lying. You didn't know. I should have seen. See me now, Lucien said, meeting his father's eyes. That's enough. The king knelt before his son, and for the first time in 6 years, Prince Lucien allowed himself to be embraced. 6 months passed. Lucien's voice grew stronger, though he still chose his words carefully. The cameras were gone. The holes in the walls had been repaired. The room had been completely redecorated, at Lucien's direction this time, with colors and chaos and toys chosen because he liked them, not because they held hidden lenses. He was learning to read, to write, to exist without constant surveillance. Some days were harder than others. Some nights he still woke screaming at 3:17 a.m., the phantom weight of bindings choking him. But Iris was always there. And slowly, painfully, Lucien was learning to be a child instead of a prisoner. One evening, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset, Lucien said, I want to help others. What do you mean? Children who can't speak for themselves. Who are trapped like I was. His silver-blue eyes were intense. When I'm king, I want to protect them. Make sure no one suffers what I did. Iris smiled. That's a good goal. Will you help me? She took his hand, the same hand that had pulled her into that chamber 6 months ago, trusting her in his moment of greatest desperation. Always, she said. And she meant it. The kingdom of Ravenhollow had many legends. Stories of ancient vampire kings, of great battles, of curses and magic. But the story that would endure longest was simpler, quieter. It was the story of a mute prince who found his voice. And the poor maid who refused to look away when a child asked for help. In a world of monsters and magic, sometimes the greatest heroism is simply bearing witness. Simply saying, I see you. I hear you. And I will not abandon you. That was Iris's gift to Lucian. And in return, he gave her something equally precious, the knowledge that one person, choosing courage over convenience, can shatter prisons built from silence and fear. The cameras were gone. The thorns had been pulled. And finally, after 6 years of darkness, Prince Lucian was free. The end. Word count, 4, 800 words, first half. Would you like me to continue with the second half, expanding the emotional beats further, or would you prefer I revise this first section to match even more closely the pacing and tone of your inspiration pieces? Add 4,200 words more. 2:20 a.m. Continuation. Vampire King's mute son screamed every night, until poor Maid found cameras hidden in his toys. Part 2. Additional 200 plus words. The 7th month brought winter to Ravenhollow. Snow fell in heavy curtains, blanketing the castle grounds in silence that felt different now, peaceful instead of oppressive. Iris watched from Lucian's window as the prince himself sat at his new desk, carefully forming letters with a quill. His handwriting was still shaky, the letters uneven. But every word was his choice. His voice, even when silent. Iris. His speaking voice was stronger now, though he still chose to communicate telepathically when words felt too difficult. The magical bindings were gone, but 12 years of conditioning didn't vanish overnight. Can I ask you something? Of course. Were you afraid? That first night, when you came to my room after I screamed? Iris considered lying, softening the truth. But Lucian deserved honesty. He'd had enough of protective fabrications. Terrified, she admitted. I thought maybe you were dangerous. That everyone stayed away for a good reason. But you came anyway. But I came anyway. She moved to sit beside him. Because being afraid isn't a good enough reason to ignore someone who's hurting. Lucian was quiet for a moment, his quill hovering over parchment. Then he wrote something and turned the page toward her. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be. Iris's throat tightened. You were brave every single day, Lucian. You survived 6 years of torture without breaking. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. I wanted to break, he whispered, switching back to speech. So many times, I wanted to just stop fighting. Stop existing. It would have been easier. What stopped you? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Stubbornness, maybe. Or spite. Theron kept saying I was weak, broken, unfit to rule. I think part of me wanted to prove him wrong. Even if no one ever knew. He paused. And I kept thinking about my mother. She died to bring me into this world. I couldn't waste that gift, even when it hurt to keep it. Before Iris could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. King Casimir entered, and Iris noticed he'd been doing this more often, knocking first, waiting for permission. Respecting Lucian's space in a way Theron had never allowed. Am I interrupting? The king asked. No, father. Lucian set down his quill. Come in. Casimir looked uncomfortable, which was strange for a vampire king who'd ruled for 2 centuries. In battle, he was legendary, decisive, ruthless, brilliant. But in this room, with his son, he moved like a man walking on glass shards. I received word from the Northern Territories, he said. Lord Valen is hosting a gathering of noble families next month. It's political. Alliances being formed, territories discussed. The sort of thing heirs typically attend. Lucian's fingers clenched around his quill. You want me to go? I want you to have the choice. Casimir's voice was careful. If you're ready, if you want to start learning statecraft, meeting other young nobles. But if you're not, I'll go. Both Iris and Casimir stared at him. Lucian, Iris said gently, you don't have to. Yes, I do. The prince stood, though his hands trembled slightly. For 6 years, Theron isolated me. Convinced my father I was too unstable for public appearances. Made me a ghost in my own castle. His voice strengthened. I won't hide anymore. I won't let his poison keep controlling my life. Pride flooded Casimir's features. You're certain? No. Lucian smiled, and it was raw but genuine. But I'm going anyway. The journey to Lord Valen's estate took 3 days by carriage. Iris accompanied them, officially as Lucian's attendant, but everyone understood her true role. The prince's anchor. The person who could read his moods, recognize when he was overwhelmed, and extract him from situations before panic set in. It was exhausting work. Lucian tried so hard to appear normal, to match the easy confidence of other nobles' children. But every crowded room, every unexpected touch, every loud noise sent him spiraling internally even when his face remained composed. You're doing wonderfully, Iris told him the second night as he sat on the floor of his guest chambers, breathing through anxiety that had finally caught up with him. I froze 3 times today, he said, his voice tight. Once when Lord Carmine clapped me on the shoulder. Once when someone dropped a glass. And once when... He stopped, shaking his head. I can't do this, Iris. Everyone's staring, wondering what's wrong with the prince who couldn't speak. Wondering if I'm still broken. You're not broken. Then why does everything feel so hard? Other children my age, they laugh, they argue, they move through the world like it's easy. And I... His hands fisted in his hair. I have to calculate every word, every gesture. I'm always performing, always pretending I'm not one wrong moment away from falling apart. Iris knelt beside him. Because you're healing from trauma, Lucian. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. I'm not human. I'm vampire royalty. I'm supposed to be strong. Strength isn't pretending you're fine when you're not. Strength is showing up even when you're terrified. She touched his shoulder gently, giving him time to pull away if he needed to. He didn't. You've been here 2 days, and you've already attended 4 formal dinners, 3 political meetings, and made conversation with 24 strangers. That's extraordinary. It doesn't feel extraordinary. It feels like drowning. Then we'll leave. Right now. Your father will understand. Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then, no. I need to do this. I need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that Theron didn't win. That I can be more than what he tried to make me. You already are. But Lucian wasn't listening. He was staring at his reflection in the darkened window, and Iris could see him cataloging every imperfection, every sign of weakness. It broke her heart. The gathering's 3rd day brought a surprise visitor. Iris was helping Lucian prepare for yet another formal dinner when a knock at the door revealed not a servant, but a girl. She looked about 14, with auburn hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Her dress was expensive but rumpled, as if she'd been running. Prince Lucian? She executed a theatrical bow. Lady Sarah of House Thornwood. I heard you were visiting and thought I'd introduce myself before the adults force us to make awkward conversation over dinner. Lucian stared at her, clearly caught off guard. Yes. Hello. You're the prince who didn't speak, right? But now you do. Sarah tilted her head, examining him with unabashed curiosity. Is it true you have telepathic abilities? Can you read minds? That would be absolutely fascinating. My cousin claims he can sense emotions, but I think he's lying to seem mysterious. The barrage of questions seemed to paralyze Lucian. Iris stepped forward, ready to intervene, but something made her pause. Because Lucian was smiling. Just slightly, but genuine. I can't read minds, he said, his voice steady. But I can project emotions. Feelings. Sometimes memories if they're strong enough. Brilliant. Show me. What? Show me. Sarah bounced on her toes, uncontainable energy. Project something. I want to know what it feels like. I shouldn't, it's not always pleasant. I don't care if it's pleasant. I care if it's real. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Everyone here is so busy being polite and proper. Smiling when they're angry. Agreeing when they disagree. It's exhausting. But you can show people exactly what you're feeling. That's honest. That's powerful. Lucian glanced at Iris, seeking permission or reassurance. She nodded slightly. The prince closed his eyes, concentrating. A moment later, Sarah gasped. Oh. Her voice was quiet now. Oh, you're nervous. And tired. And there's this edge of fear underneath everything. But also, she smiled. Also hope. Just a little. Like maybe things could get better. Yes, Lucian breathed. Exactly yes. Sarah grinned. We're going to be friends. I've decided. And just like that, Lucian had an ally. Sarah proved invaluable over the remaining days. She ran interference when nobles asked insensitive questions. She filled awkward silences with chatter when Lucian's words failed him. And she made him laugh, actual, genuine laughter that Iris had never heard before. Your Highness seems lighter, King Casimir observed on their final evening. He'd found Iris on a balcony, watching Lucian and Sarah play some elaborate game involving stolen pastries and a very confused guard. He's making a friend, Iris said. His first real one. Thanks to you. Casimir's voice was heavy with emotion. You gave him his life back. I just listened when he asked for help. Most people didn't listen. For 6 years, he screamed and everyone assumed it was madness. The king's hands clenched on the balcony railing. I assumed it was madness. You trusted your advisor. That's not a crime. It is when that trust costs your child 6 years of torment. Casimir turned to face her. How do I make this right, Iris? How do I atone for failing him so completely? Iris thought about that. About Lucian's careful words, his measured gestures, the way he still sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds. You don't, she said finally. You can't erase what happened. But you can be present now. You can listen, really listen, when he speaks. You can believe him when he tells you he's struggling. You can let him be imperfect without treating him like he's broken. And if I fail again? Then you apologize and do better next time. That's all anyone can do. Below them, Lucian threw a pastry at Sarah, who dodged and retaliated with a dinner roll. The guard looked torn between outrage and amusement. For a moment, the prince looked like a normal child. And that, Iris thought, was worth every terrifying moment. They returned to Ravenhollow Castle changed. Lucian had Sarah's contact information and a standing invitation to visit Thornwood Manor. He'd survived his first major social event. He'd proven, to himself and others, that he could function outside his controlled environment. But the victory came with a cost. The night after their return, Lucian's screams came back. 3:17 a.m. That same soundless wail tearing through the castle. Iris was in his chambers within minutes, finding him tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, eyes wide with terror. It's okay, she murmured, sitting on the edge of his bed. You're safe. You're home. He was watching, Lucian gasped, his voice raw. In the dream, Theron was alive and he was watching through the cameras again. And I tried to speak, tried to tell someone, but the bindings, he choked on the words. The bindings are gone. Theron is dead. He can never hurt you again. But he's still in my head. Lucian's hands shook as he pushed hair from his face. I see him every time I close my eyes. I hear his voice telling me I'm weak, broken, that I'll never be a real prince. And part of me, his voice dropped to a whisper. Part of me believes him. Iris wanted to argue, to insist he was wrong. But she'd learned that dismissing his fears didn't help. He needed to voice them, to drag them into light where they could be examined. What would a real prince be like? She asked instead. Strong. Confident. Able to attend a simple gathering without hiding in his room every few hours to breathe. Lucian laughed bitterly. Able to sleep through the night without nightmares. Your father has ruled for 2 centuries. He's legendary. And you know what he told me at Lord Valen's estate? What? That he still has nightmares about the battles he fought as a young king. That he still second-guesses decisions he made decades ago. That ruling isn't about being perfect, it's about trying, failing, learning, and trying again. Lucian was quiet for a moment. Did he really say that? He did. And he also said, Iris hesitated, then decided Lucien deserved the full truth. He said watching you survive what Theron did, watching you rebuild yourself piece by piece, has taught him more about true strength than centuries of warfare ever did. Tears spilled down Lucien's cheeks. I don't feel strong. I know. But you are. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound Lucien's gradually steadying breath. Finally he said, Will you stay? Until I fall asleep? Of course. Iris remained on the edge of his bed, humming an old lullaby her mother had sung to her sister. Slowly, Lucien's eyes drifted closed. His breathing deepened. As she stood to leave, his hand caught hers. Thank you, he murmured, half asleep, for not giving up on me. Never, Iris whispered back. The 8th month brought an unexpected development. King Casimir called Iris to his private study, a room she'd never entered before. It was surprisingly warm, filled with books and maps and personal touches that made the fearsome vampire king seem almost human. Miss Iris. He gestured to a chair. Please sit. She obeyed, nervous. Had she overstepped somehow? Failed in her duties? I've been thinking, Casimir began, about Lucien's future. About what he'll need to truly heal and eventually rule. He paused. He trusts you in a way he trusts no one else. Not even me, though I'm working to earn that back. Your Majesty. Please, let me finish. The king leaned forward. I want to make your position official. Not just as his attendant, but as his official guardian and advisor. You'd have authority over his education, his schedule, his medical care. You'd be responsible for his well-being in all matters. Iris's breath caught. That's an enormous responsibility. I know. And I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe you capable. More than capable, necessary. Casimir's expression was earnest. Lucien needs someone who sees him as a person first, a prince second. Someone who'll prioritize his healing over political convenience. Someone who'll tell him the truth even when it's hard. What about his tutors? The court physicians. They'll report to you. If you believe someone isn't serving Lucien's best interests, you have authority to dismiss them. Casimir smiled slightly. Consider it complete control over his recovery and education. It was a staggering offer. More power than a common-born maid should ever possess. But as Iris thought about Lucien, his struggles, his triumphs, his desperate need for someone who truly understood his trauma, she knew there was only one answer. I accept, but on one condition. Casimir's eyebrow rose. You're negotiating with the king? I'm advocating for your son. Iris met his gaze steadily. Lucien needs therapy. Real, intensive work with someone trained in treating trauma. Not court physicians who'll prescribe sedatives and call it healing. Someone who understands that trauma changes the brain, that recovery isn't linear, that he'll need support for years, possibly decades. Do such specialists exist? I don't know. But if they do, we find them. And if they don't, we create the position. Because Lucien deserves more than just surviving his trauma. He deserves to thrive despite it. For a long moment, Casimir said nothing. Then he stood and extended his hand. Deal. Find whoever you need. Money is no object. Lucien's well-being is all that matters. They shook on it, and Iris felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. But also purpose. She was going to help Lucien heal. Whatever it took. The specialist they found was named Dr. Helena Corvix, a vampire psychologist who'd spent 50 years studying trauma responses in immortal beings. She'd worked with soldiers suffering from battle-induced disorders, victims of prolonged captivity, survivors of torture. She was exactly what Lucien needed. Their first session was difficult. Lucien sat rigid in a chair, answering Dr. Corvix's questions in monosyllables, his entire body screaming distrust. You don't have to talk about what happened, Dr. Corvix said calmly. Not today, not ever, unless you choose to. This is your space, your highness. Your safe place. Nothing said here leaves this room without your permission. What if I don't want to talk at all? Lucien's voice was challenging, defiant. Then we sit in silence. Or you can draw. Right? Communicate telepathically if that's easier. Dr. Corvix smiled. The point isn't the method. It's that you have control. Complete control. Over this space, this time, this relationship. Something in Lucien's posture softened fractionally. Control. This. Trauma often takes our sense of control away. Therapy is about reclaiming it, piece by piece. It took 3 months of weekly sessions before Lucien started truly opening up. 3 months of building trust, of testing boundaries, of learning that vulnerability wouldn't be punished. Iris watched him change gradually. The nightmares lessened in frequency, though they never disappeared completely. His confidence grew. He started advocating for himself, expressing. When he needed breaks, when certain situations felt overwhelming, when he disagreed with decisions being made about his life. He was learning to use his voice not just to speak, but to claim space in the world. The year anniversary of Theron's execution arrived on a gray winter morning. Lucien insisted on visiting the memorial garden, a space he'd commissioned for Theron's victims. The 3 maids who'd died or been driven mad trying to help him. Other children Theron had reportedly abused over his 30-year tenure. People whose suffering had gone unnoticed, unacknowledged. Lucien had made sure they were remembered. "Do you think they'd forgive me?" he asked Iris, standing before a marble monument inscribed with names. "For not being strong enough to save them?" "There's nothing to forgive, Lucien. You were a child. What happened to them wasn't your fault. But if I'd spoken sooner, if I'd found a way to communicate, Theron would have killed you. You survived by any means necessary. That's not weakness. That's survival." Lucien traced one of the names with his finger. "Sometimes I feel guilty for being alive when they're not. For getting better when they never got the chance. That's called survivor's guilt. Dr. Corvix mentioned it might come up. She said it's normal. That it doesn't make me bad for feeling it." He turned to Iris. "But how do I honor them? How do I make their suffering mean something?" Iris had thought about this extensively. By becoming the king you're meant to be. By creating systems that protect vulnerable people. By making sure what happened to you, and to them, never happens again. That's a big responsibility. You don't have to carry it alone. You have your father. You have Sarah. You have Dr. Corvix and me and dozens of people who want to support you. She squeezed his shoulder. And you have time. You're 13, Lucien. You don't have to save the world today. But I can start. You can start. They stood in the memorial garden for another hour, Lucien silently saying goodbye to people he'd never met but who'd died trying to help him. When they finally left, his eyes were red but his spine was straight. He was grieving. But he was also healing. And that made all the difference. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth. The castle grounds burst into bloom, and with Dr. Corvix's encouragement, Lucien started spending more time outside. Relearning how to exist in spaces that weren't controlled, monitored, weaponized. One afternoon, Iris found him in the garden with Sarah, who'd been visiting for a week. They were laughing, actually laughing, over some private joke. "Your Highness is doing well," came a voice beside her. King Casimir had appeared silently, watching his son with an expression of profound gratitude. "He's worked hard for every bit of progress," Iris said. "Thanks to you. Thanks to himself. I just provided support." Casimir was quiet for a moment. "Then, I'm beginning formal succession training next month. Teaching Lucien statecraft, diplomacy, military strategy. All the things a crown prince needs to know." Iris tensed. "Is he ready for that?" "I don't know. But he asked for it." Casimir smiled. He said, and I quote, "I want to learn how to rule so that when I'm king, no one suffers like I did. No child goes unheard." Emotion clogged Iris's throat. That sounds like him. He's going to be an extraordinary king. Different from me. Better in ways that matter. Casimir's voice roughened. He'll lead with compassion instead of fear. With understanding instead of judgment. Because he knows, intimately, what it costs to be the vulnerable one in a world of power. They watched as Lucien attempted some sort of handstand, failed spectacularly, and dissolved into laughter with Sarah. He looked like a normal teenager. And that was the greatest gift of all. 2 years after that first terrible night when Iris had heard Lucian's screams and refused to look away, they sat together in his chambers, now truly his, decorated according to his preferences, free of surveillance and fear. "I've been thinking," Lucian said, his voice strong and clear now, "about legacy. About what I want people to remember. You're 15. You have centuries to build a legacy. Maybe. But trauma taught me that time isn't guaranteed. So I want to start now." He pulled out a stack of papers covered in his handwriting. "I've been drafting proposals. Legislation to protect children in noble households. Mandatory reporting laws for suspected abuse. Independent oversight of royal advisors. Training for guards and servants to recognize signs of distress." Iris's eyes widened as she skimmed the documents. They were thorough, detailed, addressing gaps in the system that had allowed Theron to operate for decades. "Lucian, this is incredible. It's incomplete. I need help refining it, getting it approved by the council, implementing it kingdom-wide." He met her eyes. "Will you help me?" "Of course. But you know this won't be easy. You'll face resistance from nobles who don't want oversight. People who think you're too young or too damaged to make these decisions. Let them think that." Lucian's smile was sharp. "I'll prove them wrong." And Iris knew, with absolute certainty, that he would. Because the mute prince who'd been tortured in silence had found his voice. And he was going to use it to change the world. The council chamber had never been this full. Representatives from every noble house in the kingdom crowded the space, their faces reflecting curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. They'd been summoned by royal decree, not by King Casimir, but by Crown Prince Lucian himself. Iris stood in the back of the room, watching the young man she'd helped raise take his position at the front. At 18, Lucian had grown into himself. He was tall now, though still slender, with his father's sharp features and his mother's gentle eyes. His voice, once broken and uncertain, had developed into something powerful when he chose to use it. "Thank you for attending," Lucian began, his words clear and measured. "No hesitation. No fear. I know many of you questioned the necessity of this gathering. Some of you believe the reforms I've proposed are unnecessary, invasive, an overreach of royal authority." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lord Carmine, the same noble who'd made Lucian flinch years ago with an unexpected touch, stood abruptly. "Your Highness, with respect, these reforms would require noble families to submit to regular inspections, to allow common-born investigators into our private homes. It's unprecedented. So was torturing a crown prince for 6 years while everyone looked away," Lucian said quietly. The room fell silent. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Lucian continued. "I'm asking you to consider the children in your households who can't speak for themselves. The ones suffering behind closed doors while adults convince themselves everything is fine." His eyes swept the room. "I was one of those children. And I survived only because one person," he glanced at Iris, "chose courage over convenience." He stepped forward, and Iris saw him draw on the confidence Dr. Corvix had helped him build, the strength forged through years of painful healing. The Kingdom Protection Act isn't about punishing noble families. It's about creating systems where vulnerable people have multiple pathways to safety, where abuse can't flourish in darkness because we've brought light into every corner. His voice strengthened. Where no child has to scream in silence for 6 years before someone finally listens. Lady Thornwood, Sarah's mother, stood. "Your Highness, my family supports this legislation completely. And I believe others will too, once they understand that protecting children strengthens the kingdom, not weakens it." Slowly, other nobles rose. Not all, but enough. Enough to begin changing everything. After the session ended, Iris found Lucian on the same balcony where she'd once watched him play with Sarah years ago. He looked exhausted but satisfied. "You did well in there," she said, joining him. "I almost lost my composure when Lord Carmine challenged me. For a moment, I was 12 again, freezing at his touch." Lucian smiled ruefully. "But then I remembered, he doesn't have power over me anymore. Nobody does. That's growth." That's therapy. He laughed. And Father. And Sarah. And Dr. Corvix. And every person who refused to let me believe Theron's lies about what I was worth. Below them, the castle grounds were alive with evening activity. Servants finishing their duties. Guards changing shifts. Children, noble and common-born, playing together in spaces that had once been segregated. So much had changed. So much was still changing. Sarah's getting married next spring, Lucian said suddenly. She asked if I'd perform the ceremony. Apparently crown princes can do that. Are you going to? Absolutely. She's been my best friend through everything. I wouldn't miss it. He paused. She also asked if you'd be there. Front row. Warmth bloomed in Iris's chest. I'd be honored. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Ravenhollow. The kingdom that had once felt like a prison now felt like home. Sometimes I still wake up at 3:17 a.m., Lucian admitted quietly. Still expect to feel that terror, that helplessness. But then I remember, I'm not that frightened child anymore. I'm the person he became. The person he fought to be. He'd be proud of you. I'm proud of him. Lucian's voice was soft. That little boy who survived when surviving seemed impossible. Who held on when letting go would have been easier. Who trusted you enough to show you the cameras, even though trust had only ever hurt him before. Iris blinked back tears. He was remarkable. He was. And now, Lucian straightened, his expression determined, now it's my job to make sure his suffering meant something. To build the kingdom he deserved to grow up in. You're already doing that. We're already doing that, Lucian corrected, meeting her eyes. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Iris. You saved my life. But more than that, you taught me it was worth saving. In the distance, church bells rang, marking the hour. Not 3:17 a.m. Not the time of screaming and terror. Just evening bells, calling people home. To safety. To peace. To hope. The cameras were gone. The silence was broken. And finally, beautifully, Crown Prince Lucian was free.